Okay, continuing on with the lifestyle theme. The next topic we're going to look at is rest and recovery. There's a quote here, a tribute to a cross-country skier who said that recovery is what you do between sessions and races, so you train hard and perform well at the next session. So I suppose what that person is trying to say is that while the training is important and the training days are important, it's actually what happens in between in the recovery that's equally, if not more, important. When we look at performance of any individual, from being a player in a team sport or an athlete, we have the individual at the centre of everything we do. We then look at how we develop them from a physical fitness point of view. That's one of the jigsaw pieces. We then look if it's a team sport or indeed if there's a race involved, tactical awareness of what's happening around them and how they execute the skills of that particular sport under pressure. We look at lifestyle, and lifestyle incorporates nutrition, hydration, rest, recovery. Also incorporates their balance between work and training. They could be at college, they could have a part-time job, they could have a full-time job, and they're trying to train and be the best they can be and still balance all that. They could have issues at home from a relationship point of view, and all these factors impact upon lifestyle. And as coaches should be aware of what's happening in their athlete's life. We also then have the technical ability, to perform particular skills within the sport have been achieved by the athlete and player, and again that's the responsibility of the coach to ensure that. Mental fitness is an area that some coaches shy away from as well. How we develop mental fitness within our athletes and players, and the different mechanisms and strategies that can be used to develop that. The support system then, who's supporting the athlete, whether it's from the family background, where there's a solid base, but more and more we have athletes coming to us from families that may be single parent, and again with that brings their own pressures on the athlete. So what we try and do with the performance jigsaw is at various stages of an athlete's life, the emphasis will be stronger in one of those or a few of those than it is in the other, depending on the stage of development that they're at. In some sports that we deal with, there's a huge emphasis on the physical fitness element to the detriment of all other elements, and some of them are actually neglected. So as coaches, the challenge is to ensure that you know where your athlete or coach is or your player is at each of these particular aspects and what's happening in their lives. So how do we put it all together? So you've got an athlete or a player who's had 2 successive days of training. They may be also trying to juggle work. They could be going to school, could be going to university. They've got family lives, they've got relationship lives that are all putting pressure on them. They have to strike a balance, and they have to identify themselves, and with you maybe as the coach, on what's actually happening in their life and how to strike that balance. Because if the balance isn't there, athletes are going to feel fatigued, they're going to feel stressed, and obviously leave themselves open for the potential of burnout. So appropriate recovery strategies help lessen these risks. So to perform well and consistently over the long haul without these problems occurring is a measure of a well-developed training program. So if they've got balance in their life, obviously we want them to be the best they can be and to perform to the optimum of their ability, then we need to know that balance is in their lives. So the importance of recovery phase is just, as I said at the outset, not all about the training and the training workload and what's happening on training day. As coaches or players strive to make improvements, the recovery component is often overlooked. So it's often left to chance. So there's more focus, as I mentioned, on the training loads. So during recovery, it's when the real training benefits happen. That's when they occur. That's when the body recovers. That's when the body gets stronger during the training period. We have instances of some young players, particularly in Gaelic sports, who at this time of the year, which is around January, February time, are playing for their colleges in Sigerson Cup competitions, which is a full-on competition. They may be playing for their county at senior level, and they're in a pre-season phase there. They may also be playing under 21 and potentially minor, or they may even be playing other sports. So they could be training or potentially training 2 days a week over 5 or 6 days with a game then at the weekend. So as coaches, we have to be aware of that, and someone has to cry halt to what they're doing, so they do get the benefit and the opportunity to recover. Both training session and subsequent recovery program are equally as important. One doesn't take precedence over the other, they're both equally important. So one of the symptoms that we have that starts to manifest itself within some of our younger athletes and players is muscle soreness. So delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS for short. What are the symptoms of it? First of all, we've got muscles tenderness to touch, and there's a decrease in the force production. They haven't got the drive that they normally have. There's a loss of flexibility and a loss of mobility. And again, these are warning signs, and obviously if we're trying to train when we're fatigued, it obviously increases the risk of injury as well. So there are two common forms of recovery in vogue at the moment. One would be ice baths or hydro pools, where you have contrast temperature water immersion between hot and cold, and then massage. However, the benefits of both are anecdotal, and anecdotally we find that older players, from a psychological point of view, and older athletes feel that ice baths and hydro pools are beneficial to them. For younger players and younger athletes, it's not as evident. So with immersion in water, and particularly contrast immersion, but the ice baths, it's developed from the treatment of acute injuries, and you alternate between hot and cold, so you achieve a pumping action within the muscle within the body. So immersion guidelines: temperature in the shower for cold should be between 12 and 15 degrees centigrade, and you should immerse yourself for 10 to 30 seconds. The contrast of that then is at hot, where the temperature should be between 37 and 43 degrees centigrade, and you stay in it for 1 to 2 minutes. Within the bath then, again the temperature is constant between 12 and 15. You stay in the bath for between 30 and 60 seconds, and then within the hot bath you stay in it for between 3 and 4 minutes. So you alternate that then by 3 times. Always begin with the cold and end with the warm, and stick to this prescribed time. There's no extra benefit found of staying longer than guideline times, and indeed we have cases of some people staying in maybe a little bit too long in some of the cold baths and getting the early stages of hypothermia setting in. Again, be careful that you haven't had a cold or a flu within the last 24 to 72 hours. And again, bruising or an injury in the last 24 hours, which will obviously manifest itself. So with massage, again, traditionally it's been long tradition in sport, and it's been used widely through all sports. It increases the blood flow to the muscle, and again that enhances healing process and quickens it. It improves the stretching of the tendons and connective tissue, and also that leads to the relief then of muscle tension and spasm. Again, from an athlete's point of view, psychologically, when they have a massage, it decreases the anxiety that they potentially feel for the competition that they're about to face, and it also improves relaxation with them. So the perceptions of recovery are improved as well. So from a psychological point of view, that's all a positive from you as a coach, and obviously from the athlete's perspective as well. So moving on from that, as part of the recovery, and again there are certain things that we like to hit to help achieve the body recover fully. After a match or training, we want to get obviously glycogen into the system. After training, the athlete's glycogen levels are very low, and they need to be replenished as soon as possible. So the best results can be achieved by a carbohydrate intake immediately after a match or a training session. At this stage, athletes and players usually aren't that hungry, so they must be encouraged to take carbohydrate drinks or some form of carbohydrate into the system. Studies show that there is a window of opportunity there in the 15 to 30 minutes after a training session or a match, that the player athlete has the opportunity to restore glycogen at a much faster rate. If you miss the window of opportunity, you'll still get glycogen back into the system, but if you're in a fairly heavy competition timetable, then obviously you want your glycogen levels restored at the faster rate. So encourage your athletes or players to have some form of carbohydrate available after the training session. It could be maybe a lunch box to bring with them, where they have some milk, yogurt, sandwich, cheese, whatever it is, just to hit that window of opportunity. Foods you should be looking at then, I mentioned some of them, also bananas, oranges, again sandwiches, rolls, low-fat yogurt. And again, from an early age, for those that are coaching young athletes or players, it's always a good thing to maybe encourage them to bring that lunchbox with some of these foods with them in it, and explain to them why they're actually doing it. With alcohol, and again, particularly within Irish culture, there is a predisposition to maybe celebrating victories, no matter how major or how minor they are, and invariably that involves alcohol. But just remember that alcohol promotes dehydration, and it's also high in calories. So on the one hand, if you've taken part in a competitive race or a match, obviously you've lost body weight through the dehydration process, so you want to replenish your fuels from a fluid point of view again, but you also may have an athlete or player who you want to make sure they're not putting on weight, because that may be one of your objectives set out at the start of the year. So just be aware that alcohol is also high in calories. So as we all know, it impairs coordination, balance, muscle reflexes and visual perception, and it also interferes with liver in the forming of extra glucose. So as we all know, glycogen is taken into the system, processed and stored, processed through the liver, then stored within the muscles, and again, if you're trying to hit a particular target for a training session in the following week, or indeed a competition race or a match the following weekend, then we want to be able to take in glycogen at a high rate. Alcohol interferes with that process, and again the glycogen isn't processed at the rate we want it to, and again that can lead to early fatigue if there's a deficit in your glycogen stores. So it also, if you've got an injury and you've gone through the RICE principle with rest, ice, compression, elevation, where you've tried to stop the flow of blood into the injured muscle, and an hour later the athlete finds themselves having a couple of pints down in the local pub, it increases the blood flow again, increases the heart rate, increases the blood flow into the injured tissue, and again that prolongs the time frame for recovery from the injury. So abstinence from alcohol obviously encourages the injuries to heal that little bit quicker, particularly if you've gone through the immediate first aid on an injury. So in summary, you should attempt to begin every session in a fatigue-free state as much as possible. So you're able to give it 100% at your session, in the knowledge then that you have your recovery afterwards to fully recover, so you're ready for the next session. Recovery methods combined with an active cool down and nutrition and hydration strategies will provide additional benefits. So as you mentioned, there are a number of targets and windows of opportunity you want to hit, especially when it comes to replenishing your glycogen and also getting on board the required fluids. Recovery is influenced by both physiological and psychological issues, and it's important to include both in your recovery. Use recovery strategies in training and lesser competitions first, and then an effective recovery program must be tailored to the individual. So what suits me might not suit you, or if you've got a number of individuals within your team, some of them may prefer hydrotherapy baths to massages from a recovery point of view. So know your player, know your athlete.